ANG 202. Study Section 1. Spoken and Written Language. Introduction. This course is specifically about the sounds and sound patterns of English. However, there is a need to understand the two basic forms of language and be able to differentiate them. Therefore, this study section will expose you to the differences between spoken and written language. It will also make clear the spoken language, which is acquired naturally when dealing with a mother tongue, has to be learned in the classroom when dealing with a second language such as English in Nigeria. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this section, you should be able to differentiate between English as mother tongue and as second language. Differentiate between spoken and written language, and explain why spoken language is natural and written language artificial. Discuss the different stages of speech production. Terminology. Spoken English. English used in speech rather than in writing. Written language. Words written down rather than spoken. Mother tongue. The language you acquire first, often from childhood. Igbo, for example, is a mother tongue for millions in Nigeria. Second language. A language you learn after your first language. English, for example, is a second language in Nigeria. Mother tongue versus second language. Spoken English is often acquired in a first language or mother tongue context in countries such as Britain, America, part of Canada, and New Zealand. Though some linguists are pointing attention to some Nigerian children speaking English as a mother tongue, this has generated conflicting opinions in terms of whether or not the English they acquire measure up to standard. In order not to get into this controversy, we will not consider Nigeria as a country where English is acquired as a first language. We must also be careful here because of the issue of standardization, since Nigerian English is yet to be standardized. English is a second language in Nigeria. It is therefore not acquired, but learned. Spoken English, which every normal person acquires naturally, without being taught in class, in a first language setting, has to be learned in class, in a second language setting as Nigeria. English sound segments, that is, individual sounds such as B, T, K, I, etc., are challenging to learn for us as non-native speakers because they are not the same with the sounds of our mother tongues. The English suprasegmentals of speech, such as stress, intonation, and rhythm, are more challenging because they are not features of our mother tongues. Due to this, they constitute major areas of problem for people learning and using English as a second language, especially in a country such as Nigeria. Therefore, as you are coming into contact with the various aspects of this course, you are advised to concentrate more on the practice of the difficult sounds, which are not in your mother tongues, and the suprasegmental features, which are most likely going to be strange to you. This textbook should therefore be supplemented with others, especially those accompanied by pronunciation materials, such as audio CDs. As earlier pointed out, the naturalness of spoken language is limited to the mother tongue, while it has to be learned in the classroom in a second language context as Nigeria. Therefore, most Nigerian users of spoken language do not acquire the language naturally, but rather by learning. Another salient point is that, for most Nigerian users of English, the mother tongue must have been acquired before the learning of English. Therefore, there is an unavoidable tendency for the mother tongue features to interfere with the target language, which in this case is English. This is one of the factors that account for the peculiar nature of Nigerian English that makes it different from other types of Englishes. There are certain sounds and features in the mother tongues. In this case, Nigerian languages, which are not found in English. There are certain sounds and features that are found in our mother tongues, which are not found in English. There are certain rules that apply in standard spoken English that are not appropriated in Nigerian English. It has even been discovered through research that many people specialize in spoken English by virtue of their education do not apply the rules they have learned in class. All these contradictions may make the learning of English phonetics and phonology look tedious to a second language speaker. Hint: Nigerians don't acquire English from native speakers, but from one another. Consequently, they don't speak it the way native speakers do. Many features of the indigenous languages find their way into the English they speak. Their indigenous proverbs and idioms also find their way into their written English. The English that results from all this is far from the English in places where it is the indigenous language. Many Nigerians' parents bring their children up with English, but as it is expected, the English used by their parents is Nigerian English, so they bequeath to their children too is Nigerian English. Can we then classify those children as native speakers of English? Or can we, because of them, classify Nigeria as one of the countries where English is mother tongue? Spoken words versus written words. Spoken language is oral and it is acquired naturally, while written language is artificial. An adequate introduction to English phonetics and phonology should expose learners to one of the guiding principles of the study, which is the realization of the fact that sounds and letters do not often correspond. Consequently, a good understanding of this discourse requires you to know from the start that you must not use your knowledge of letters to prepare yourself for the task of learning English phonetics and phonology. You have to concentrate on the sounds as they are produced rather than how the letters are spelt. Using your knowledge of spelling to guess how English sounds are produced will most likely get you into trouble than be a help to you. It has been observed over time that second language learners often allow their knowledge of letters interfere with the learning of English sounds. You therefore have words such as sword pronounced with the letter W inclusive, whereas W is silent in the word. Rather than pronounce SWD, you should pronounce S-D. There are many of such words in the English language. This calls for caution on the part of the English students wishing to perform well in phonetics and phonology. For the purpose of understanding this course well, you should therefore concentrate on how sounds are pronounced rather than how they are spelled. Tip: often in English, you are not to pronounce all the letters you spell. For instance, you spell rendezvous but pronounce rendezvous. Now, let us look at some differences between spoken English language and written language. We will be specific now since our emphasis is on the English language. In written English language, the symbols used are letters. These letters are used to form words, and words form phrases, clauses, and sentences. On the other hand, in spoken English language, there are also symbols, but these symbols are not letters. There are unique sound symbols that represent sounds. The letters used in written language are pronounced in different forms in speech. No letter has a particular single way of pronunciation in the English language. Sometimes, many vowel letters, including even consonants, may be realized as a single sound. An example of such is que, which is pronounced as q. Here, ue represents the sound long I. There is a tendency, therefore, for a second language learner of English phonetics and phonology to get confused because the letters and the sounds are not consistently the same. This is a characteristic of the English that should be noted with caution by second language users. Look at this. Key, translated as K and long I. Ew, J and long U. Night, N-A, short I-T. Right, R-A, short I-T. Waist, transcribed as W-A, short I-S-T. Pray, translated as P-R-E, short I. Que, you, night, right, waist, prill. For this reason, as second language learners of English, you should forget your knowledge of English letters for a good comprehension of English sounds. Therefore, in this course, you'll be introduced to a new set of symbols that represent sounds. They are not letters as you have in the English language, but each stands for a particular sound of English. Speech production stages. The act of speaking is complex, i.e., it is not as easy as we believe or experience. You do not just open your mouth to talk. There are certain processes involved in the art of speaking that the speaker himself may not consciously notice. There are different stages involved in speech production. Let us take a look at these stages. 1. Psychological stage. This is the language processing stage when the idea to be expressed is conceived in the brain and the content is converted into phonemic symbols in the brain's language center. Physiological stage. This is the generation stage. It is at this stage that there is a generation of motor commands to the brain motor center. It is a stage at which the various organs are instructed by the brain to articulate a sound. Physical stage. This is the transmission stage. At this stage, there are articulatory movements for the production of speech by the vocal organs based on the motor commands from the brain. At this stage, the brain must have instructed the organs of speech, and the organs of speech will articulate the sound. This stage is accompanied by emission of air from the lungs in the form of speech. For the English language, the air coming from the lung is modified at various points by the organ of speech in the production of sounds. As explained earlier, these stages are not noticeable by the ordinary speaker or listener, but it is a process that is continuous happening as long as we articulate sounds in speech production. The organs of the body that are involved in sound production have speech imposed on them. This is because their primary function is not speech production. Your tongue, two lips, teeth, lungs, oral cavity, nasal cavity, tongue are not produced for speech. All these are organs of speech, but speech is not their primary function. For example, your tongue is primarily for tasting, your two lips to seal your mouth, your teeth to cut, etc. Study section summary. In this study section, we expose to you the spoken and written forms of the English language. We discussed the differences between the two forms. We highlighted the dominance of speech over writing. We also pointed out the need to remember that the spoken form of English is not acquired naturally in a second language context as Nigeria. We finally discussed the stages of speech production, such as the physiological stage, psychological stage, and the physical stage. End of study section 1. Thanks for listening.